My name is Erica Callaway, and I have been an educator for, I don't even know how many years now, over 10. So I think going on close to 15, and started in middle school. So taught middle school social studies for a number of years, then have done instructional coordinator, and eventually moved into the district office and worked with leaders in the district office, and then have moved to Teacher Ready and student education in the past year, and have really enjoyed just getting to know everyone at Teacher Ready, especially our wonderful students and instructors. And we are just super excited about the things that you do in your classrooms and are going to do in your classrooms. And we hope that today's information about instructional calendars will really help you as you start to close out this year and then enter into a new school year. This should serve as some great information to get you started. So we are going to talk about instructional calendars today, as you know. Also called curriculum calendars, so you might hear those terms, both of them, you'll hear them just as often, and really talking about mapping out the year. So we did a pre-session survey. Obviously, when you were registering, you had some questions, and the majority of the responses were around these three themes. So we just sort of clumped what you wanted to learn into these themes so that we could ensure that we are meeting your learning needs as we proceed today. So effectively mapping, how to effectively map to be able to teach the standards in the year. That was one that was sort of overwhelming in this. So my assumption there is that there is always this anxiety around getting all of the standards in, making sure that you have time to teach all of the standards, especially with given testing windows and how the interruptions can frequently cause some added pressure. So I know that that's one that is probably has caused anxiety throughout the year, and so we're going to just use this time as we get to talking about mapping out the standards and other things that you can include on your curriculum calendar to hopefully make you feel a little bit better, and then some really tips and tricks on, you know, if interruptions do occur, that's okay. Just keep moving, and then we can make sure that you have sort of an idea in your back pocket of, okay, this happened, however, I can adjust by doing this. So we'll talk about some of those things. And then also how to incorporate engaging projects and lessons. So some of the comments were around, okay, now, or I have an instructional calendar, but I'm just not sure how to use it to plan at the sort of micro level. So we'll talk about that as well. And then also managing time. So managing time came up very frequently in the in your responses. And so a couple of things around that, though. I could tell that some of it was managing time within lessons themselves. So I think that has to do with planning for transitions within lessons. So we can talk about that, but I want to say that's something that as you're developing lesson plans, that's definitely going to be something that you will include in the lesson plan. But this having this sort of foundation of a curriculum calendar or a curriculum map will help you get to that level. And then also managing time within units. And that's really going to speak back to theme number one. So all of this will hopefully come together in terms of a big picture as we move on with the content. Okay, so let's talk about why. Why do we need an instructional calendar? The instructional calendar really is the best tool for you to stay on track. So, you know, the comment about how do I make sure that I'm covering all the standards each year, this is really going to be your best way to set yourself up for success. So, and the second bullet there, the most important way to start the year, it really is. There's nothing worse than starting a school year feeling like you're completely unprepared and generally out of control. So when you don't feel organized, you know, your students are not going to feel organized. So it's really a very important step in planning for your year. And really, I think that this is the great time of year to start thinking about an instructional calendar or a curriculum calendar, because some of you have already completed a year. Some of you are going into it. Some of you are even working through the program right now if you're one of our current Teacher Ready students, and you're hitting our benchmark lesson where you're being asked to create an instructional calendar. So all of this is kind of great timing because it's fresh in your mind. You know sort of what needs to be done at this point, and maybe just a little bit more instruction on how to is really all you need to just get yourself going for next year. So we all have standards that we need to teach, and we have, like we said, some pressure to teach them within a given time period. So the instructional calendar is going to be your best friend in planning to successfully teach your students what they need to know. That is the why. Hopefully that was enough to convince you that you need one. Okay. Really quickly, and Mandy's going to help me get some answers here. Have any of you already been using an instructional calendar of any type? So I just want to kind of get a feel for what you're currently doing and using.
I mean, if there's a particular type that you're using, go ahead and type that into the chat as well. That way we can share that with everybody.
So again, and some of this is, iListen. Okay,
iListen, ready.
So some of you, Atlas Rubicon, okay, great. So we do have some experience here with using an instructional calendar or just like this planning tool in general, which is great. So we'll build on hopefully what you already know and may have familiarity with as we go on. So let's talk about what. So an instructional calendar, we already said, is the foundation. It is really that solid foundation piece. So when I think back, and I'm going to flip back really quick. I think back to the theme. When we talk about this number 3, how to manage time within lessons and within units to ensure students master given standards, that speaks to this being the foundation of all other plans. You're not going to be able to manage time within units and lessons without having this good foundation of an instructional calendar first. And so again, I'm speaking to experience here. I've tried to do it without an instructional calendar before, and it's a wreck. Like there's no sense in trying to start a year without an instructional calendar. They can be found in a variety of formats though. You know, when you Google instructional calendar or curriculum calendar, you get all kinds of results that come up, all kinds of images, people sharing their experiences and their versions of one. So there are tools out there. There are a variety of tools. But at a minimum, this is what I really wanted to draw attention to, especially as most people in your pre-session survey responses said, I just need to know how to do this, how to get started. That's kind of where we're going to focus. But at a minimum, you want to include the standards. So you're going to have some kind of visual representation of the scope and sequence of the standards that you're going to teach for the year. And then that is, like we said, going to be the launching pad for every other plan that you create for the year. All right, here we go. The good stuff, the meat. All right, so in some instances, we're going to go through these how. So I came up with 7 steps, and I really went back to when I create an instructional calendar, what do I do exactly? So this is going to be, these are going to be our steps. So first, determine state, district, and school requirements for instructional calendars. That's your first step. If you are new to a school district, new to a school, you need to figure out, is there some kind of mandate? Do we have to do something specific and include something specific on it? Some districts will say, yes, you need to turn in, it needs to have your standards, all of your assessments for the year, and any maybe like focus questions or thematic units. So if that's the case, you need to find those things out ahead of time. So that's step 1, this sort of this gathering information step. Step 2, you're going to decide the method. And I'm going to, in just a second, I'm going to walk you through my method, and you're going to see it is like a for real draft of an instructional plan. But decide your method. Are you somebody who prefers an electronic format for these kinds of things? And if that's the case, then get yourself some kind of electronic calendar. There are versions available. There are even apps for like lesson planning that are available. So if you are somebody who likes the electronic format, go ahead and decide what what do you want to, what are you going to use? Or do you need paper and pencil when you're drafting? For me, I prefer paper and pencil when I'm doing a first draft of something like this, because I just feel like I feel a little bit more flexible when I have paper and pencil, sorry. And then just start thinking about the big picture when drafting your instructional calendar. So step 3, in terms of big picture, it's very important to consider days that are already reserved by your district or your school. If there is something on your district or school academic calendar that is a day that's blocked for professional development, maybe it's a day blocked for field day. If those things are already on an academic calendar, you want to get a copy of that so that you have everything in front of you that you need before you even get started drafting. So you don't want to overlook days that are reserved by the district, because later on that's going to cause a kink in your plan. You're going to have to rearrange things, and not that you're not going to have to rearrange things. Trust me, a fire drill will throw you off more than anything. So you're going to have to rearrange, but it'll cause less disruption if you already have those days blocked off. So that's going to be step 3. Then you're going to plug those days in, and you're going to start looking for scope and sequence documents. So some states and even districts will publish to teachers scope and sequence documents and resources for the year. So these are going to be resources that are going to usually tell you the sequence, the logical sequence for teaching the sets of standards for your content area or your grade level. And they'll typically include a recommended number of days for each standard. That's going to be extremely valuable information. So I want to throw in a personal little side note there. A scope and sequence is great and can be exceptionally helpful, but you as the classroom teacher need to think through what you might already know about the standards and the difficulty of each standard, because you may believe that less time or more time is required for a particular particular standard. So those are great. Scope and sequence documents are great, helpful, but always let your own judgment sort of rule in that situation, because you don't want to follow somebody else's recommendation when it's sort of going against what you believe to be true and having had experience already as a teacher. I hope that made sense. We'll talk through that. Okay. And then you're also using the scope and sequence. Again, they're going to have like a logical sequencing. Start thinking about standards that can be grouped together to create your units. Those are going to become your units of instruction. So this is step 5. Sorry, I didn't say this step. And then one caution I have here too, because this came up in one of the pre-session comments, is you can't clump too many standards together at once. Teaching too many standards at one time can be disastrous, So you want to be really logical. You want to be very thoughtful about what your students are able to do and what makes sense when you're looking at the standards as a whole. And so in most teachers, if you talk to them, most teachers will tell you, it's really going to be difficult to teach more than 2 standards at a time. And oftentimes those are going to be 2 standards that really clearly go together. If it's like causes of the revolution, and then it's also talking about like economic impact. Well, those are going to go together because sometimes the economics will cause the revolution. So those are things that logically go together, but you can't just try to do like 5 standards in one lesson if it's just too much and doesn't make sense. Grouping is usually possible when it's a broad standard supported by a more narrow standard or indicator, so that's something to consider. And then, once you have a chance to start thinking through how long it's going to take for students to master each standard, then you go to the last step, which is plotting the standards on the calendar. So here are the steps. This is very, very broad. One thing that I also want to just say about the scope and sequence, because I think a lot of people might not know about these being available. If you don't have them available, I want to say your next best resource for something like that is a veteran teacher. So please do not be afraid to ask those folks for help when it comes to creating a scope and sequence or looking at one to help you with your instructional calendar. All right, now this is going to be the fun part. I'm going to take you through how I created an instructional calendar, and this is a rough draft, so please no judgment on how rough it actually is. So we talked about the steps, and if we go in order, so obviously let's just pretend that I've already gone through step one. I know that there is in fact a requirement for my curriculum calendar, and the number one requirement is that I have to have all standards included and major assessments. Those are my requirements. So that's step one. If we go through, so here is a version, and you should be seeing something similar on your screen on the webcam. But when I talk about requirements, this even has some color coding on it, and this, again, is very rough. So I literally did pencil and paper. Like I said, that's what I enjoy. That's my sort of like go-to when I'm drafting one of these documents. So the color coding is helpful because for me, the yellow represents standards, the actual standards. The orange is going to be those special projects that we talked about. Like once you have all the standards plotted, then you can start figuring out like, oh, okay, that's where I can include this project. And then major assessments are represented by the pink here. And then I've got the district days that are already sort of reserved for special holidays or professional development. Those are going to be my days in blue. Okay, so we got started. Step one was just that. What are the requirements? Step two is decide your method. So clearly, my method, paper and pencil and highlighter. And then three, get a copy of your district's academic calendar. So this is a copy of my old district's academic calendar, where it has, first day of school, it's got school report card dates, it's got teacher work day, holidays, all of those things. So I used this, so as part of step three, I used that to inform the days that I knew were going to need to be blocked off immediately. So all of these days in blue came straight from that academic calendar for the district. So I was able to know, okay, on the 6th of September, clearly it's Labor Day, we're not going to have any school. So I'm going to have to account for that when I think about how many days does it take for students to learn this standard. That's a day lost in a sense. Progress report, early release day. You're not going to get through a real comprehensive lesson plan on that day because every day is going to be, or every class period is going to be shortened. So just things like that as you're looking at the academic calendar for a district, you really have to take into consideration. Okay, and just in case anybody's wondering, this is a 7th grade social studies version. So even though we're obviously using 7th grade social studies standards, the same process can be applied no matter what grade you teach, no matter what content area you are. It's the process that's important here, not the standards, not the grade level. Okay, so step 4, getting a copy of an available scope and sequence document. So I did that for this. I couldn't find that, so sorry, it's been a couple years. I could not find that actual document, but on this, to create this, I did include some of the suggested days per standard to create my unit. So that's an important step here. So just to point out an actual unit. So economic systems, this was a week-long unit because I knew that in order to teach the Glorious Revolution, for example, and then we get into monarchies and revolutions later, they had to have a firm foundation of economic systems that existed during that time. So that goes back to that whole, how do you sequence things? That was a suggestion for me in my scope and sequence document from the state, but it then was my job to figure out, okay, do I teach that before I teach some of this Africa, Asia precursor information? And to me, it made more sense to do some of the colonial days information first, then get into the heavy hitting economics. So you're just thinking through those things as the important critical step in 4 and 5. So that was how I kind of used the scope and sequence. Then step 5, determining which standards could be logically grouped. I kind of just talked through that, but there is a particular grouping that I wanted you to see. And that, okay, French Revolution, French and Latin Revolution. So I had actually already considered they need to be separate. But what happened here in terms of grouping was really talking about causes of revolutions in general. So I was able to group these because it made sense before we broke them out into separate studies of revolution. Hopefully that makes sense. But that's step 5, determining what makes sense in your student's mind, what will help them understand the information better, and then how do you plot that out to ensure that you're providing enough time for that to be really mastered in their mind. Okay, and then step 6, we've kind of talked through the entire time here, is how long will it take? This is the part that can really be challenging if it's your first time. That's why I really stress talk to a veteran teacher. Decide, if the teacher in the next room knows for a fact it will take you, 7 to 10 days to teach the scientific revolution, then by all means, try to give yourself 7 to 10 days. So once you have those pieces really thought through, go ahead and start plotting them. So I'm going to go back to my first page here. And my first page, I'd already had the district days. And then I knew I needed to do some stuff here for the school. I wasn't going to really get started teaching my standards until the 3rd day of school. And then once I did, though, I knew, okay, early exploration, I need a week, maybe a day, because, things happen at the beginning of the school year, because this is a review. So that's something else I knew that was valuable information. I knew they had already learned about early exploration in 6th grade. So this was literally a review of that. So that is a logical unit to have only be like a week and a day. So the other thing, too, is you're probably going to draft this or some form of it several times, and then you're going to erase, and then you're going to replot and remap. That is what you should do, because you're going to need to then give yourself time to plot everything out and get to the end of the year. And then once you get to the end of the year, you may say, oh no, I've got 4 more standards I need to teach, and I've already filled up my whole map. What am I going to do? So that's, again, where collaboration comes in handy. So here, when you get to Memorial Day, we all know you're kind of done. So you gotta get all the teaching in there. So just plot it out the first time. Decide, okay, do I not have enough time? Did I not, include all the standards? Or maybe you included all the standards and you finished in like April. Okay, well that's not good either. So something's off there in terms of pacing. Collaborate with a peer. Start thinking through what are the hard skills, what are the hard standards or concepts that I know might take them more time, and then that's when you start to make those adjustments. So you'll do a rough draft, and then you'll just start drafting until it's making sense. Okay, so one of the other things that I feel like we need to talk about is that the theme from theme number 2, which was the incorporation of some great projects, some engaging projects, and lessons. So in September, again, I knew that I had some great material from this Medal of Honor resource that I had. And it all tied together because I was able to talk about character and those things that make great leaders, and all of this is about revolution. So for me, these are going to be represented here, these special projects. So once you have a good understanding of your standards, a good understanding of how long you have for each set of standards or each unit, that's when your juices start to flow about, okay, well, I have this really great idea about how to teach this, and I know I can make it engaging by doing this. So that's when you start to plug those really special, really fun projects and lessons into your plan. But you're not going to add these things, these special projects, my orange guys, you're not going to add those in until you've got the standards laid out. And I do hope this is at least able to get you started. So I know sometimes it's just, I don't even know how to get started. Hopefully this will be a good.
Do we ask the questions or type them?
You can unmute and ask.
We can hear you. Come on through.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I was a little late. So you started with your standards, right? You basically, like, you have your calendar and you got your standards, and so you're saying, okay, where is the standard plugging in, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
And one of the things that we talked about is if you have access to any pre-created scope and sequence document. So I usually had access to a state-created scope and sequence because we had state standards. You would be able to use those to the extent that you knew it made sense for your students. Does that make sense? For example, if the scope and sequence document said, for great example, if I go back to this early exploration and the scope and sequence for my state said, oh, you need 12 days, which it probably wouldn't, probably be like 10 days for that. I don't think so, because what I know, like I said, like they actually finished that in 6th grade. That was their last unit in 6th grade. So for me, this should only be a review of the key concepts of exploration so that we can jump into the revolution. So same thing, math. If you're teaching math and your scope and sequence, says, well, you need 8 days for multiplication of 3-digit numbers, and that they just finished that. So that would be something that you would use as, I'm going to pare that down a little bit. We're going to spend maybe 5 days on it, and then I can reteach it if I feel like it's needed. But that's where you would use those documents to help you make some judgment. I hope that answered the question.
It did, thank you.
And I just saw a question come up, or not a question, a statement come up about double checking the curriculum or scope and sequence maps every quarter. Yes, 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 yes. That is exactly why I would go to paper and pencil, because I knew there might be adjustments mid-year, and you always want to be able, you have to allow yourself flexibility to adjust. So, we talked about plug those work days, all those days that you know are never going to be your days anyway, plug those in because you're going to have to adjust around them. But let's say let's even say weather. There's a hurricane day or a winter storm day that you have to make up later. All of that is going to impact what happens, and you will have to make adjustments. But the key is having it mapped out to begin with. Your adjustment and your modifications will be 50 million times easier than if you had no plan at all. Because if you had no plan at all, you'd be just flying by the seat of your pants, I guess praying that you teach all the standards by the end of the year, which is never a happy place to be. So having it just mapped out in general is always going to be a great first step.
Just wondering if you can point me in the direction of a scope and sequence for your district. My district doesn't have them published.
I know if you check most State Department websites, that's going to be where you can almost always scrounge them up. So I would check both. I would check your district websites, like maybe the curriculum and instruction department. So if you go on your district website, you will almost always see under like department, you'll see curriculum and instruction usually. I would bet they would be there if they're posted by the district. If not, the State Department websites will almost often have the same type of department, like it'll say curriculum they may even have one that's like a link that says curriculum calendars or scope and sequence. So check those. So that would be the first, those would be the first two places that I would look. In terms of like where I was getting this information to create this, I'd have to research it because it's been a while since I've had access. That's another thing, they cut you off when you leave. So yeah, we'll have to.
The Virginia Department of Education, if you go on theirs and look under their curriculum frameworks, theirs are public and they link back to their standards. So they have a lot of information on there that is very accessible.
That's great.
There are different standards for different places, so you can't just, quickly copy it over, but it's a good example of a place to get started.
And everyone, I will make sure when I send out the follow-up information and the recording and the newsletter aligned to this particular topic that I include that as a resource for you, and it's a great jumping off point. And I'll send that out to you, but make sure you subscribe to that newsletter too, because if you can't make it to these every month, you'll still be able to get that, those aligned topics, and a lot of it will have to do with specifically what went on during the webinar and the session. So I'll make sure to send that out to you.
Great. So that'll be that Virginia, that'd be great. But I just want to get a feel for, and this may help generate some additional questions, what elements of this instructional calendar concept, the steps that we've talked about, have you already been using? And then what was shared that you feel like really will enhance your planning and preparation for next year?
Is it okay to begin using the textbook order as the start for the scope and sequence?
That is absolutely, that's a great question. So the order of units within a textbook. So, there's always this don't use the textbook. Well, you got to have something. So if that's the only resource available to you, yes, because here's the great part about a textbook, especially if it's something like math, any of them, just any of them. They have already used research to determine how students learn information. So they're already going to be logically sequenced, and you can get a textbook sometimes that does not adhere to that. That is very rare, however. It's very rare for them to not have already put very, great thought into this sequence makes sense for students' brains. So I would absolutely use that. The thing you're not going to get from a textbook usually is the amount of time to devote to each unit. So that's the thing you're going to have to think through, that piece. But yeah, use the sequencing for sure.
And then how to sort out which standards to use or focus on in the textbook.
A lot of times in the textbook, what you're going to find is, you say there's 10 or more standards per unit. Some of them are going to be standards that are being reinforced, and some are going to be standards that are introduced. So it's important to look at that and figure out which standards are which so that you know where to focus most of your time. Of course, reinforcing the standards is very important, but you're going to want to make sure that you're really hitting those that are being introduced for the first time.
Yep. And so that was speaking directly to the point of, I knew they had already learned early exploration, but I also knew they knew nothing about what starts a revolution or causes a revolution. So that's why, that's going to be my focus, is getting us to that point. And then also, like we said, I know you can't see the paper anymore, but setting them up for those concepts that if they don't understand it, so that economics systems, if they don't understand those, it'll be very difficult to grasp the causes of a revolution because it's all intertwined. So Kim's point is right. There are things that are going to be quicker for you to go through because they've already done it. They've already learned it. It's also where pre- and post-testing comes in. So pre-testing, what do they know? How do you know they know?
Nathan, I found a sample source and sequence for school in Ohio. There are so many standards. How can you possibly envision teaching so much? Am I missing something?
When you start looking at the standards, do you see some overlap in concept? And if that's the case, that's where that clumping, so what step was that? 5, which standards can be logically grouped, that's where that clumping can come in. So where we say it's best to try to not teach more than 2 standards at a time. There are instances where there's a narrow standard that is going to cross maybe 5 standards. And so you're going to end up teaching that standard for 2 weeks sometimes because it's actually going to fall under those other standards because it makes sense for you to reinforce that concept. That goes back to what Kim just said about reinforcing versus introducing. Those are going to be reinforcing that concept. So it may look like a lot, but you can sometimes group them in a way that is not overwhelming. So that, Nathan, is why you do this first draft of this map. And then you figure out, I've got 10 standards left. I don't know what to do these things. Okay. Can they be grouped with something else in a sensible way? Mm-hmm. I hope that makes sense. And the best advice for that, if you're still feeling like I have no idea what you just said, the best advice for that is just get a draft on paper. Just try it. Just try it, and this will all start making a lot more sense to you, and you'll feel a lot better when you just get at least one draft done. Okay, it's Jared. So, and the question, I'm going to go back. The question was about
scope and sequence called something, or the ESOL considerations.
It's okay, Jared. You're fine. I don't think that there would be any other considerations outside of, while I talked about social studies, because that's where, you know, I had an example. I knew that example would probably be very helpful to just see it like for real, you know, here, how do you do it? If you follow the steps, the 7 steps, I think that those are the same considerations you need to make with your ESOL students. Because you're still going to have, no matter what, you're still going to have content that you have to teach them. You're still going to have a given period of time in which to teach it. You're still going to have to logically think through how to meet those requirements within the given time period. So I feel like that's, in terms of creating and mapping out what you need to teach, these steps are going to work, or at least help, no matter where you are, what you're teaching. If you need like resources, we can probably round up some resources, but I think that this is really going to be, these steps are going to be most helpful. Another good thing that we should actually put out as a tip is, and I think people are sometimes scared to do this because just like we teach our students, like, you cannot rely on the internet for everything. We're scared to like just Google stuff sometimes, but yeah, like you'll see Instructional Calendar, scope and sequence, like we said, curriculum framework, curriculum guide, curriculum map, curriculum calendar. It's all the same stuff pretty much. You could even Google like mapping out standards. So yeah, you'll see it. Oh, good. Okay, so we've got all of the names.
Jared, one of the things that I found, I taught in a school that it was in Virginia, but we had lots of ESOL students. And one of the things that I found was the standards that related to the written language took a lot more time than the standards that were written, that were geared toward speaking or understanding or whatever. So I knew that if there was something that they needed to be able to express themselves in writing, those would take me longer to get through with the students than those that did not. Just because the writing, you know, obviously comes later than the other skills when you're dealing with an ESOL population.
That is a very good point. Thank you, Kim. That's a very good point. Hey, that's for students in America learning English as well. Writing always is a challenge. And you will teach writing in every single subject area, no matter where you are, because writing is a challenge. All right. Okay, well, we're going to tie it up here because this is definitely, yeah, writing is definitely tough. We are inching up on time, and like Mandy said, we're going to give you all of the recording, all of the information that we've provided. We'll include additional resources, so we'll get you the Virginia documents, any of the ESOL documents that we have, we can send those as well. And really, that's it. We are very grateful for your time today, knowing that it is precious. So just send over any other questions that you have, though, and just know you can't break anything by getting started. So just get started. Use your pencil and paper so that you can erase 1,000 times. And then just go from there. So get in touch when you need to, and we thank you for your time.